Productive Pastor 67, How Do You Learn? Welcome back, friends. Productive Pastor is Chad. Great to have you here on the podcast. Today we're talking about how do you learn. Had this one in the decks for a while. There's a lot of stuff here that I might have talked about in little bitty pieces on Twitter and places like that, but kind of putting it all together on an episode here about learning. But before we jump into that, I want to point you towards one thing. We've got the email list rolling again heavy for the last few weeks. And this is how this works. Every month I write broadly on one topic and I break it down each week into action-focused items. It's also where I share all the other fun, awesome stuff that's going on in Productive Pastor. So if you're not on the email list, cruise over the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/067. Subscribe and sign up for that. This month I'm writing on how do you wrap things up. So I've already talked about that at the high level. I've gone at how do you wrap things up in the day, how do you wrap things up for the week, and then next week my article is going to be about how do you wrap things up for the month. So this sounds interesting to you. If you're curious about what does it mean to shut off the workday in vocational ministry, an incredibly difficult thing, I want to encourage you to kind of come sign up for the email list. You can go back in the archives, read what we talked about this month, and let's learn together. So that is the front matter for this kind of stuff. We've got tons of other cool stuff coming out the pipeline, the Trello course in a couple of weeks, and other big stuff. And the best way to find out about any of that sort of thing is to cruise over and be part of the Productive Pastor email list. So with that, we're done. Front matter's over with. It's time to get on to the big bulk of the show today about how do you learn. Now, a couple of things. Why do we care about how do we learn? That's the big question mark. So personally, a few years ago, I went through one of the biggest shifts in ministry I've ever had in, almost 15 years of doing this vocationally. And part of that shift was learning, so much about myself, but also so much about, my vocational ability and what does it mean? How can I grow? Where were there frustrations that I realized had been exhibited for years in ministry, and I did not know that they were weaknesses, any of that sort of stuff. And it was this massive learning piece that goes through there. And I'm going to talk some about that kind of as we go through these methods, but also if you are interested in really digging deep into this sort of thing, I've got a couple of open slots open for private coaching this fall. And if that's something that you want to talk about, there's a link over in the show notes where you can grab a free 30-minute introductory call, and we can chat about what it might mean to do some of these things together. But as pastors, growth is a thing that is part of what we do. Ministry is all about transformation. But here's the thing, and I've been thinking about this all the last few weeks, is I've even kind of been going through, some of these processes myself again with how my ministry is changing this summer. But, if everything's about transformation, but we don't as pastors think about our own personal transformation, about the learning and the growth, all of that, then how well are we able to actually talk about this in the real life? And I'm not just talking about Holy Spirit transformation, spiritual transformation, but also, think about the ways that people look to church or look to pastors to talk about all sorts of other change and transformation. And this is the thing. This episode's not about resource collecting. As somebody who does create content, that's both free content and premium content, sometimes I see folks are doing what I call resource collecting. It's this idea that if they have access to all of these things, then when they need them, they'll be able to kind of sift through it and go that. But I've been down that route before. I mean, I can't tell you, how many free ebooks I have downloaded and sitting inside my iPad, how many like $19, $29, like first level pieces of content from creators, both in ministry and other places I've bought, think it's going to change things. And I hate to tell you, just collecting the resources really won't do anything when you need to grow. But the biggest first step is understanding like what you don't know and how you need to respond to that. Now, that's the basics of adaptive leadership. And if we as ministry leaders cannot do this personally, we're going to struggle to do it organizationally. We're also going to struggle to do it in one-on-one ways with people. And so that's kind of that first big why is, if we or in a vocation of transformation, then how are we being holistically transformed this whole time? And the second piece of this why is this. We are going to hit ministry walls. I've written online about ministry walls before in the past. I'm going to have some links to the show notes to those essays. They're quick, they're short. But a ministry wall is what happens when we come against this thing that seems like we cannot go any further. The only way we can go further is if we get over this ministry wall. And there's multiple ways that we can get over walls. But sometimes the only way we can get over the wall is to personally grow. And I think that's reality because oftentimes I go back to, the old Stanley Kubrick movie, Full Metal Jacket, and Private Pile trying to get over that wall. We think about walls in those kind of terms like an obstacle course that, we have to go up and over the wall, but then we land back on the same elevation on the other side. But that's not the case. A wall really is a change in elevation. And when we can do the tough work to get over the wall, we will actually find ourselves at a different level of elevation. And so much of my own coaching practice is realizing that there are walls sometimes that pastors have been hitting up against for years and have never managed to get over it. And it's caused, frustration, it's caused anxiety, it's caused exhaustion, it's caused depression, it's caused all sorts of things. And so, when we hit this midpoint in our role, like I'm 43, I've been doing this, full time for 15 years. I've been working in the church for over 20. If there's a moment in time comes where we realize, okay, we're in this sort of a shaping and shifting, but how do we go about that? How do we go learn through that? And how do we develop? How do we learn? That's what I want to talk with you today about. So what I have 4 specific things that I have learned that I found to be helpful in this. And the first one is this. It's what's called conscious competence theory. Now, this is a learning model that I've discovered through a coaching program that I work with Passion and Partnership that is a year-long development program for United Methodist pastors. And it's just baller. I wish I would have had the opportunity to actually go through this program as a pastor 5 or 6 years ago. But now I'm a coach inside of this program, and it's amazing. But we use conscious competence theory to help someone begin to understand, where growing edges might be. And this is the basic conscious competence theory. There's a link there's a graph in the show notes for you to understand this. But what it really is it's a framework of understanding what we know how to do. Now, the word competence sometimes can be seen as a negative idea, but really what competence is you having the ability to do something. And so the very first step in conscious competence theory is this. It's unconscious uncompetence. The best way to describe this is you don't know what you don't know. Now, the next layer, the next stage of conscious competence is conscious uncompetence, that you know what you don't know. The next stage, the third, is conscious competence. You know what you know. Then the fourth and final stage is unconscious competence, that you don't know what you know. And here's the wild thing I love about conscious competence theory. It's one of the best ways I have found for someone to understand the full breadth of their knowledge and their competence, because this is the thing. We are all going to have bullet points inside of all 4 of those learning areas. And every one of those learning areas has positives and has negatives. And it's so much that when I first heard this, I had to work so hard to get through the language of competence, because it's not about you doing a bad job. It's literally about you having an awareness of what you can and can't do. But then it also provides a framework to move through those things. It helps you develop in a way that respects your strengths and your natural abilities. And so conscious competence theory is a beautiful thing. It's a practical thing. Like you can get pen down to paper and begin working through these sorts of things. And when you have an understanding of your ministry walls and you're saying, okay, wow, I'm bumping up against this thing. This is problematic. That first step of going to conscious competence theory just begins to help you realize, okay, wow, yeah, I don't know what I don't know, and this is how this is manifesting. Second thing is this, and these one and two, they're not really in an order. None of these 4 necessarily in an order per se. But number 2 is assessments. Now, I'm a massive fan of assessments. And depending on the growing edges that you have, you're going to be able to find out so much about assessments. My favorite assessment out there, period, is the Clifton Strength Finders. I love Strength Finders. I use it in my coaching all the time. I'm about to spend a week in October becoming a certified Gallup Clifton Strengths coach because it's just that big of a deal to me. It gives us a grammar. It gives folks handholds. It's one of the most helpful things I know. And so the strengths paradigm is amazing at providing personal awareness. I spent so much time in season 1 of the podcast, especially episode 1, talking about the role of personal awareness inside of our ministry life. And so much of this awareness can go back to these assessments. They help us not cookie cutter out some sort of response. I had a massive growing edge a few years ago in how my role as the pastor inside of church meetings. And it was inside of assessments that I realized that when I get bored, I try to turn every single meeting into a vision and strategy session. Only problem is that's not what those meetings need so many times. And so I went into my Clifton Strengths report, went down deep, looked at other strengths I have. And this isn't about what you're good at or bad at. It's about how you do things in a healthy way and how you find healthy energy while you're doing them. That's where I realized, wow, I'm just getting bored and I need a quick energy bump. So I'm going to these kind of default things. Instead, it was about pulling out at my assessments, looking at this and realizing, okay, so Chad, you are in an unconscious incompetence space right here of what your role is. Like you don't know what you don't know. And for me, it was you don't know how to be the primary leader inside of a meeting with other leaders. And so what I did was I went back into my strengths report. I found other strengths that are actually more beneficial, more appropriate, and more helpful in that scenario. And I sat down and walked through the conscious competence grid and named out these things of what this is going to look like. And the assessments did everything. The assessments were huge. Third thing, and this is a book I read this summer, and I read it just because I was on vacation, and we were in Seaside, Florida, and there's a bookstore in downtown Seaside that I don't like crowds, I don't like traffic, and that this little town is full of crowds and it's full of traffic, but every single year I try to get to this bookstore because it's an amazing, beautiful bookstore. It's called Sundog Books, and I always pick up a couple of things to read, and I grabbed this, and I grabbed it honestly because the cover looked good. And it's called The Yellow Pad. It's by Robert Rubin. It's a former Secretary of the Treasury. But my dad swears by a yellow legal pad. And I was like, this looks fun. This looks cute. I looked at the back of it and realized the whole book is a memoir about decision-making in stressful seasons. And I was like, that's appropriate for ministry. I'll have a link to this book in the show notes if you can go pick it up because it's a great book. It might be one of my favorite reads of 2023 so far. But like I said, the whole book is about decision-making and what does it mean to make decisions. And you might be saying, okay, Chad, why aren't we talking about decision-making in an episode about how we learn as leaders and how we grow? And it's because of this. And it's this thing that Rubin talks about in the book called strategic dynamism. And this is the idea of it. It's an environment in which tactics and long-term strategy shift and adapt, but core values and principles remain constant. So much about us understanding how we learn, but also how we grow and how we get over ministry walls. It begins with understanding who we are. Now, some of this goes back to two about assessments, but this is the thing. When you understand who you are, regardless and no matter what, that's the first filter that you need in decision-making and learning because it's the things that are unchanging about you. One of the things I do in private coaching is go through a personal ministry grid. There was an episode, I think it was 14, maybe. I'll link to it in the show notes from last summer where I talked about the basics of this, and it's a great episode. But I've walked through this even deeper with folks over the last year. But when we have this core understanding of what our vocational call is, that's going to help us sort out the decisions that we have to make. But then when it comes to learning, what it helps us understand is, okay, in light of who we are, let's think through what this issue is. And once we understand what the issue is, and this is what Reuben kind of goes on throughout the book over and over and over. But when we understand what the issue is, then we can think about what our objectives are. Right there is that learning moment. Right there is this place for adaptive challenge when we don't have the skills that we need to have for the moment. And then we think through what exactly this will take. It actually helps us realize, okay, if I'm going to be able to learn competency in this to make this natural, then these are the things I'm going to have to shoot for, the micro goals that I might have to have in place, but then also to name out these are the spaces of competency I will have to grow in. So The Yellow Pad, Robert Rubin, great book. Go pick it up. I read it in a couple of 3 days. It's not complicated. Like I said, it's a memoir, but there's just so much about personal growth, but also who we are in an unchanging way inside of this book. So I can't help but recommend it more and more. The last thing is this, number 4, and it's when you know that you have to learn something, one of the best things you can do, besides not just like saying, hey, I need to grow in my ability to better administrate our facilities at our church. Okay, you've set that goal. You've had this issue that you just named. But a development plan will help you state your objectives and actually help you out. This is exactly what this will take. Development plans are the things that you create that help you declare, this is how I will learn and this is how I will grow. We think through those 4 quadrants of conscious competence theory. We think through, okay, this is what this behavior will look like in each space. We're become just deliberately honest about ourselves inside of unconscious uncompetence. Okay, then we think through, okay, conscious incompetence. Okay, these are the things that I'm just going to have to be aware of. When I do this, I have a tendency to divert. For me, so much of my diversions come back to when I don't know what to do. I go into vision land, and I saw even last year, wow, that makes me less anxious, but it actually can make other people significantly more anxious. And so that was a huge learning for me inside of the conscious incompetence. Like, okay, Chad, don't go into this space. This isn't as powerful as you think it is. It's just energizing for you. And then we start naming out, these are the intentional steps I will need to take. The whole idea of conscious competence is I'm doing intentional things. And it's when those intentional things become natural or become habit and don't have to take intentionality that we move into learned idea of unconscious competence. But a development plan is simply you stating how you are going to get to this place that you need to go. Now, a lot of this episode, it's a high-level view, big picture perspective of what this looks like. And really, the space into this is where we either move into a deep attachment to personal development, or we look at, hey, I need to find a coach. I need to find a guide to come alongside of me in doing this. This is beyond the space of just mentoring. This is somebody who has a trained development ability that's going on. But you can do this yourself. Like, this is not something that's so outside of who you are. In fact, it is part of adulthood, part of moving into this middle space of life. Like, I've realized now I've been on the earth longer than I probably will be on the earth after this. This is one of those skills that is almost like a superpower that so many folks don't understand. And it's one of the things I love when I look at on Twitter especially, and I look at how younger people now are intentionally growing. This is a thing that's just part of us saying, you know what, I am not satisfied. I want to be changed. I'm going to do the tough work of what does it take to grow and move past, to learn new things, to become a better leader, to become a better pastor, to become a better person, all those sorts of things. So there's going to be tons of links in the show note, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/067. Also, you can come hit me up on all the socials at RevChadBrooks, or come hang out and ask questions inside the private community on Facebook. There's a lot of pastors there. I call it the Productivity Party. It's a lot of fun. So thanks for tuning this episode. Next week, since it's the beginning of back to school, all that, I'm doing an episode about the things that I want to teach people going into seminary, the things I wish I would have had on deck and ready to roll when I was stepping in that space of life. And there's actually a fun conversation going on in the private Facebook group right now about those very things, folks sharing, what they value and what they would like to pass on. So make sure to come hang out with us over there on that. And so until next time, I'm Chad Brooks. I'll see you on the internet. Have a good one.